Good evening or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Borough Hall.
Vamos a empezar de nuevo y bienvenidos a Borough Hall.
I'd like to welcome you to this third public hearing of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board.
Bienvenidos a la tercera
To this public hearing of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board.
a la hearing pública. I don't know that word. Perdón. Una audiencia pública.
This is the third of four public hearings
Es la tercera de cuatro.
to consider comments concerning proposed rent adjustments
Para considerar comentos
for,
para la renta, ajustes de la renta,
for renewal leases,
para renovar los leases,
for apartments, lofts, hotels, and other housing units,
para apartamentos, lofts, hoteles y otros
subject to the Rent Stabilization Law of 1969.
subtejido. No
To
sé
the Rent
decir eso.
Stabilization Law of 1969.
Para la renta estabilizada en 1969.
Okay. And the Emergency
96.
and the Emergency Tenant Protection Act of 1974. Emergency Tenant Protection Act.
I know Spanish, but I'm not fluent in like the jargon.
Okay.
I feel so bad.
All right. These adjustments
Esos ajustes
will affect renewal leases
van a afectar los leases que van a ser renovados,
commencing
empezando
between October 1st, 2014,
octubre 1, 2014
okay, through September 30th, 2015.
hasta septiembre 1 de 2015.
Okay, gracias. I will now take roll call. Please respond if present.
Por favor, responden si están aquí presentes.
And this is for the board. Magda Cruz.
Presente.
Harvey Epstein.
Aquí.
Esteban Flax. Aquí. Sheila Garcia. No está aquí. Cecilia Hosa. Carol Shine.
Here.
David Wenk.
Here.
Sarah Williams Willard.
Present.
And the chair, Rachel Godsill, is in transit and will be here momentarily. Okay, continue with the translation too? It's enough. Gracias. The next meeting of this board will be a public hearing, as I mentioned a moment ago, on June 19th. This will be the final and public hearing to comment on the proposed guidelines. All right. Senora, she should stay. Can someone tell the translator to stay if we need her? This will be the final public hearing to comment on the proposed guidelines. It will be held in Queensborough Hall, 120-55 Queens Boulevard, Kew Gardens, New York. Directions to this hearing can be found on our website, nycrgb.org, in the About Us section, under the meeting schedule section. You can sign up by calling the Rent Guidelines Board offices at 212-385-2934. And as always, there are copies of our meeting schedule here today. The final vote will take place on June 23rd, starting at 6 p.m. It will be held in the Great Hall at Cooper Union, 7 East 7th Street at the corner of 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, New York. Please note that revised drafts of both the hotel and apartment explanatory statements will be circulated to the board via email on Friday, June 20th. We request your comments on and/or suggested additions to the statements no later than the morning of June 23rd. Any questions, please see the Executive Director, Andrew. Also, if in your folders are written submissions that the RGB staff has received since June 16th. Before we begin our hearing, I would like to read some of the rules and parameters for those who are testifying before the board today. First, each speaker will have 3 minutes to give his or her testimony. In the event that large numbers of people wish to speak, the chair reserves the right to reduce the allotted speaking time. The clock will beep once when the speaker has 30 seconds left. Speakers must confirm their presence with the RGB staff at the registration table located near the entrance of the hall. Speakers will not be called if they have not checked in at the registration table. I will try to call several names in advance. If your name is called, it is advisable that you move to the front if possible. If you have materials to distribute to the board, you should give them to the RGB staff sitting at the sign-in table near the entrance again. Yes. And we ask you to please try to stay within your allotted time so we can get through as many speakers as possible this evening. So on that note, I ask for the first speaker to join us. Christopher Athenaeus, please step up and give your testimony.
I have just one question.
Yes.
How many have registered so far? Do you know?
I don't know.
Roughly.
I have 13 here.
No, that's not total.
15, 26.
No, you haven't.
Oh, these don't go in.
Yeah, they're not. We have about 10 slips so far, but we had about, I think, about 25 people pre-registered.
Okay.
But we'll get, those folks haven't showed. We'll see how it goes.
Thank you.
And can I just also ask Steve that we at least announce to the audience that if they need interpretation, they should let us know when they come to the podium, and we do that in Spanish?
Yes. Cicely, would
I
you
didn't
do
get what you said. I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said.
I just want to make sure that we should say publicly that if people need interpretation in Spanish, we have that available. So, Cecilia.
Las personas que necesiten traducciones, por favor, déjenos saber con anterioridad para poder asistirles. Gracias.
Okay. Thank you, Christopher, for waiting.
So, my name is Christopher Athenaeus. I'm a small owner from Brooklyn. My family and I operate several properties in Brooklyn, doing much of the work ourselves. This year, for the first time in the history of this board, you're considering a 0% increase, despite data which is quite to the contrary. The reason we have hearings, public testimony, and group testimony is to gather information which supports this board's ultimate goal, which is to preserve and maintain the housing stock in New York City. Unfortunately, the board seems to be overlooking the fact that the PIOC is 5.7%. Board members and the staff need to take a closer look at the PIOC, which has not been updated in years. Furthermore, the board fails to examine the age of our housing stock. It isn't rocket science. Older buildings require more maintenance, just like a 90-year-old has more medical needs than a 20-year-old. The PIOC looks at the incremental increase of a particular cost, but it doesn't look at how many times we have to call that plumber or repair that roof. Just recently, for example, I had a leak which I discovered came from slate windowsills from when the building was built. This isn't in the PIOC. Over $1,000 to install 2 windowsills. How will I cover this cost for the future? We'll have to defer maintenance. How much can we defer? Several months ago, in my 6-family building, I received my quarterly water bill, which was $2,515. Normally, it doesn't go above $900. Almost a 3-fold increase. After further investigation, one of my tenants said they were meaning to tell me that their toilet was constantly running, but just didn't get around to it. Several years ago, when the lead paint law passed, requiring owners to presume lead paint existed in all buildings built before 1978, this became an astronomical cost to me. To add insult to injury, when I spend in the tens of thousands of dollars to abate lead-based paint, I can't even claim it as an expense because the cost is so high. So the IRS requires me to capitalize it over 10 years, resulting in higher taxes. This board is pushing owners over the edge with the recent preliminary guideline range. It's a shame because ultimately the tenants will be the ones who get hurt by this. You're setting the stage for long-term owners to sell their buildings, take their money, and leave the city. Perhaps speculators or other well-intentioned owners will buy these buildings, but nonetheless, when you push out long-term owners from running rental properties, which in most cases have little or no mortgages, new owners will be unable to maintain the buildings, which will be highly leveraged. You'll end up losing owners who don't see this as a business, but as part of their life. These are the owners that the city should be trying to encourage and cultivate, not push out. If small owners like me don't provide the housing, who will? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Have you owned your buildings since at least 2007?
Yes.
And throughout all that time, over the past decade, have you had rent-stabilized tenants in your building?
Yes.
During that period of time, I'm sure that you've come to hearings for the Rent Guidelines Board, and you've been a participant in these hearings. Is that correct?
Yes, I've been coming since junior high school when my grandmother used to take me to these hearings.
Has there ever been in the past 10 years a final guideline that you believed and you advocated as being sufficient? Has it ever been that the owner's proposals ever been accepted by the majority of the board?
No, I've never felt that the guideline increases were adequate.
Thank you.
Harvey?
Thank you for coming to testify.
You're welcome.
How many units do you own?
About 150 apartments.
150 apartments. And out of those 150, how many of them are market and how many are rent stabilized?
I would say over 50% are rent stabilized.
So 50% are stabilized and 50% are market.
No,
Yes.
he said over 50% are stabilized.
Over 50% are stabilized.
I was asking him.
Right, but you were noting it incorrectly.
I'm not talking to you, Magda. I'm just talking to the gentleman. Thank
And I
you.
was simply correcting the record.
So you said more than 50% are stabilized, less than 50% are market, right?
Yes.
And they are.
I also have rent control tenants.
You have some
as
rent
well.
controlled tenants. And how many of those do you have?
Less than 10.
Less than 10. And you apply for your MBR increase if you're rent controlled
I
tenants?
do.
You do. And so for these 150 units, you have a managing agent or you do it yourself?
No, I do it myself.
You do it, so you self-manage all these units?
Yes.
And so you're talking about having not sufficient income based on these rent guidelines increases since 2007.
Yes.
That's what you're saying. So can you tell us what's your monthly rent roll for these units?
I don't have that information with me, but I file the RPIEs every year as I am required to.
So you don't.
So you have that data in your reports.
So you don't know approximately how much your monthly rent roll is?
I don't.
And you don't know how much. So are you making profit on these buildings?
All of the profit that I make in these buildings go back into the buildings, and I self-manage these buildings. If I had to hire a manager or hire a plumber or hire someone even just to put out the trash every night, these buildings would be at a deficit.
So
that's the only way the small owners make a go of it, to do the work themselves.
And this is, do you have a,
I mean, and
you have
I've
a
said
full-time
this
job?
year after year, and many of the board members just don't get that.
And
I mean,
this-
we can only squeeze and tighten the belt so much.
And do you have a full-time job on top of this?
This is my full-time
So
job.
managing these buildings?
Yes,
Is your
this is
full-time
what I
job?
do,
And this is
yes.
where you garnish all your income is from
Yes,
these buildings?
yes.
So you have to make some kind of profit because you have to live, right?
Right, this is where I live.
So
Right.
you make-
is that against the law?
No, I'm just asking.
Well, at the tone of your voice,
Right.
the tone is you're making it like this is a crime.
Right, but
I mean,
you're
this is how
arguing
we
that
live.
you're-
And if you come to my buildings, which I certainly invite you to come anytime,
Sure.
and speak to my tenants, no one in this city maintains buildings like I do, as well as I do. And if you're going to push out the small owner, you're going to create. Do you want NYCHA? Is NYCHA the way we want to run this city? Is that the housing that these people want to live in? I don't think so. These tenants would love to live in a building like mine or with owners like me. And you're pushing owners over the edge. It's just unfair. It's unfair. It's not right. And be careful what you wish for, because when it comes true, it's going to ring and resonate like the 1970s and the fiscal crisis of the 1970s. You're not going to see it in I'm honest. You're not going to see it in a month or a year. But in several years, if things go the way they're going this year, you're going to see owners walking away from buildings and speculators buying them, especially the smaller buildings, which are really critically at risk. It's just not a good situation for tenants or owners.
Well, I think the focus here is really in the balance between tenants and owners. And I understand you're concerned about making enough profit. It sounds like you do an okay job making some profit, and we have to balance that interest out against tenants who are telling us that they're being squeezed, and any increase will result in their eviction, result in them losing their homes. We have 54,000 homeless people in New York today. 30,000 people get evicted every year, and our job is to balance the interest. I really appreciate what you have to say, but that's not the only equation before us, and our job is to consider everyone's interest. Sure. Your job is to think about what you need. Our job is to think about what New York needs. Thank you.
Well, actually, I take my job and my responsibility very seriously, and I enjoy and I'm proud to provide quality housing I'm proud to provide quality housing to my tenants, and I know my tenants appreciate that. And I know tempers can flare here, and I'm not taking it personally, nor should you. But I'm just saying, I don't think this board recognizes the value of small property owners. And when this board considers a 0% increase, you're not only hurting the quality of housing stock over the coming year and few years, but you're sending a message, a very strong message to owners. This isn't worth it. Get out of not only sell your buildings, but get out of New York. That's why New York is the highest tax rate in the city, in the state of New York. And I just think you need to value property owners. And
Mr. Athenos, good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the large crowd here. Mr. Athenos, good to see you. My name is Rachel Godsell. I'm the chair of the Rent Guidelines Board. I apologize for being late. The train from Washington didn't go as quickly as I'd like, and I really appreciate the large group of people here. It sounds as though there's been a fairly long exchange with Mr. Athenos. Mr. Athenos, I'd like to say it is extraordinarily important to every member of the board to ensure that tenants are protected, that a rental housing stock is protected, that small owners and large owners who handle and cover their buildings well are recognized as such, and we do appreciate your comments. It seems as though it's time to move to the next speaker, so thank you, Mr. Athenos.
thank you. Thank you.
Come here to speak. I wouldn't do it.
The next speaker is Mr. Jones, James Jones. And Mr. Jones, you are in fact number 3.
D, Commissioner of Finance. NREM foreclosure, page 1. Commissioner of Finance, City of New York. Dear Mr. Jones, I write to confirm our conversation today. The New York City Administrative Code at section 1145C, parenthesis 5, provides that those who apply for an NREM installment agreement on residential properties must supply an affidavit stating that each tenant at the parcel has been so notified. This location possesses 30 independent residential units. For those of us who do not speak Latin language, NREM means bankruptcy, contrary thing. Bankruptcy, contrary thing. Negro stoogie, real estate company, scheme to lie or deceive tenants, unanimously voted him no bankruptcy comeback. Negative. Complete negative bankruptcy. The tenants would not have voted to have these people back. The deed was given to the government of New York. It was signed over by the corporate. When the Corporation Council interacts with the Commissioner of Finance and puts the deeds back in the hands of the government of New York, at this point you no longer own the property. But these people. They claim that, oh, this is my home. They don't mention there are 30 independent residential units at this location. But he's going to. They don't verify anything. But he goes in and says, well, this is my home. He doesn't mention that there are 30 independent units at this location. 15, some of them are 15-foot ceilings. Now, but he's going to take, in order, he's going to say, well, I'm a little homeowner. I have my children there. He doesn't say that he's put black families out in the street with little children. He doesn't mention anything like that. The tenants would never have voted to give him a bankruptcy comeback.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. And I'm sorry we don't have authority to do anything about your concern. Carol Curris.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hi. My name is Carol Karras, and I am a landlord and a small businesswoman. In October of 2013, my husband and I decided to take our savings and purchase a pre-World War II building with 21 apartments in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. Over the past 8 months, I have learned a lot and got to know my 21 tenants, most of whom have migrated from the country Georgia. They are hardworking people. Most are healthcare workers, laborers, and truckers. They work hard, and they are very proud of who they are and where they come from. Some of my tenants are Section 8, SCREE, and DREE. Their rent increases are covered by subsidies. In just 8 months, we had record colds. As a result, our heating bills were extremely high. We had lots of running toilets, leaks, and the main sewer was clogged. As a result, our water bill was very high. In addition, extensive plumbing expenses were incurred. We take pride in our building, so we invested in repainting the halls, the lobby, as well as the alleyways. In addition, I replaced many of the appliances, refrigerators, and stoves for many of my tenants, and no, I did not charge them. I used the monthly rent to invest back into my apartments. I still have a long way to go. Being a landlord is not a walk in the park. Dealing with New York City Housing, transferring my titles, submitted the paperwork in January, and I started to receive the subsidiaries in March. But it took 6 months to receive the payments for January and February. Many of my tenants are late with their rents. They're behind, but eventually they do pay. Still, my husband and I take pride in our apartments and in our investment. I'm here to talk about the fair rent increases. In a short period of time, I witnessed firsthand the increasing cost to maintain and repair my buildings. I know many landlords like myself feel the same. So I ask you, is it fair to limit me with such low rent guidelines, yet my expenses are not limited? Like my real estate taxes, my water, my heat, my electricity, my insurance, my contractors. When you limit me, you're limiting my ability to reinvest in my building for my tenants, which in the long run is a lose-lose for the tenants, the landlords, our community, and the equity of New York City. Thank you for letting me express my concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Karras. So for the next speaker, we have 3 people listed, which will mean that will be 3 people in the allotted time. Andrea Maria Bello and Erika Coca. Good evening.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Mi nombre es Mario Bello. Voy a leer el testimonio de mi esposa Andrea Bello. Mi nombre es Andrea Bello y vivo en el 792 de Hart Street, apartamento 3R, por 34 años. En el 2012 me diagnosticaron un tumor canceroso. En el momento que me lo dijeron, sentí un vacío. Entonces, algo dentro de mí me dijo, tienes que luchar porque tu familia te necesita. Mi hija estaba conmigo y estaba llorando. Yo le dije que dejara de llorar, que cambiara las lágrimas por oración. El médico me abrazó y le dijo a mi hija, tienes una madre muy valiente, vamos a luchar por su vida. Fui sometida a una operación que duró 7 horas, luego la quimioterapia desde el 2012 al 2013. Estuve luchando con esa situación, pero jamás me imaginé que mi verdadera lucha estaba por llegar, que después de 34 años de vivir en el 792 de Hart, sin ningún tipo de problema con nadie, iba a ser lanzada a la calle como una rata, porque un dueño ambicioso compró el edificio y empezó a hacer toda clase de proposiciones y acosos convenientes para él, para que nos fuéramos. Como no aceptamos, destruyó el interior del edificio sin tomar en cuenta que éramos seres humanos que vivían allí y lo puso inhabitable. Después vinieron los inspectores de la ciudad y del departamento de edificio y descubrieron que el edificio estaba en muy malas condiciones, ya que intencionalmente eliminaron los soportes debajo de nuestro apartamento para que colapsara. Nos desalojaron porque corríamos el riesgo de morir al colapsar el apartamento. En este lugar fue donde nacieron mis hijos y aquí viví desde que llegué de mi país. Verme en la calle fue lo peor que me ha ocurrido en esta edad, en que solo uno desea estar tranquilo y vivir en paz. He llorado mucho, lo que no lloré cuando me diagnosticaron el cáncer. Me tocó llorar ahora sin poder dormir, sintiendo que nada tiene sentido, preguntándome qué hice, qué va a pasar mañana. Estoy consciente de que esta situación sí puede matarme, porque el médico me dijo que mi vida depende de mi estado emocional y de mi alimentación especial que no tengo. Ahora no tengo ni una cosa ni la otra. Tengo que comprar la comida en la calle, que es para mí como un veneno, una tranquilidad que no encuentro. Despierto con ansiedad preguntándome, después de aquí, ¿dónde iremos? ¿Qué pasará? Cuando paso frente al edificio y lo veo así, siento dolor, angustia y tristeza, con todas nuestras pertenencias dentro, sin poder tocarlas. Cuando las cosas llegan porque la naturaleza lo produce, es diferente, no cuando el mal es producido por un casero ambicioso. A veces me encuentro con vecinos que me abrazan llorando conmigo. En medio de todo confío en Dios y en la justicia, que esto se resuelva lo más pronto posible. Mis nietos venían cada sábado a verme y yo cocinaba para ellos. Busca su casa como si fuera su casa. Extraño sus abrazos, sus besos. Ese te quiero, abuelita, ya no está. Los extraño mucho, pues ellos son el aliento de mi vida. Por favor, necesito justicia para tanta injusticia.
Señor.
Pido no aumento de renta. Me he comportado así porque soy el esposo de ella y he sufrido lo mismo, aparte del diagnóstico de cáncer. He pasado lo mismo. He sido tratado por desorden emocional generalizado por los médicos debido a esta situación. Gracias.
Ms. Coca, do you have the testimony in writing in English? Would it be possible for you to provide that to the transcriber so we can have it as part of the record? But the 3 minutes has transpired, and so I think it's important that we hear. If you can summarize very quickly, but again, we have so many people and we need to hear from everyone.
We were told that because it needed to be translated, that we had extra time. This is what we were told in the front. I appreciate it, thank you. My name is Erika Coca. I'm the proud daughter of Luz Yolanda Coca, housing organizer for Bushwick Housing Independence Project. And I'm translating for Ms. Bello. My name is Andrea Bello, and I live at 792 Hart Street, apartment 3R, for 34 years. In 2012, I was diagnosed with a cancerous tumor at the moment when my doctor said that I felt a sense of emptiness. Then, something inside me told me that I had to fight because my family needed me. My daughter was in tears. I told her to stop crying. I told her to change the tears for prayers. The doctor hugged me and said to my daughter that she had a brave mother and added, "We will fight for her life." I was submitted to a surgery that lasted 7 hours. Then I was in chemotherapy from 2012 to 2013. I was fighting with this situation. However, I never imagined that my real struggle was about to begin. I never imagined that after 34 years of living at 792 Hart Street without ever having any problems with anyone, I was to be thrown out into the street like a rat. All this because of an ambitious owner who bought the building and began to make all kinds of proposals and harassing us so we would leave the building. Since we didn't choose to leave, he began to destroy the building in order to gut renovate it, without taking into consideration that human beings were living there, thus making it uninhabitable. Afterwards, city inspectors and inspectors of the Department of Buildings determined that the building was in very poor physical condition and that we had to leave because we were running the risk of death by the imminent collapse of the apartment. My children were born and lived there since I came from my country. To find myself homeless on the street was the worst thing that had happened to me at this age, when one expects to live quietly and in peace. I cried much more than when I was diagnosed with cancer. I was unable to sleep, feeling that nothing made sense. Wondering, what did I do wrong? What will happen tomorrow? I am aware that this situation can kill me because my doctor told me that my life depended on my emotional state and a special diet that I can't prepare anymore. Now I have neither one. I have to buy food on the street, which is like poison. I don't find tranquility, wondering anxiously when I get up every morning, where will we go next? What will happen? When I walk by the building and see it, I feel pain, anguish, and sadness. All of our belongings are inside, and we are unable to touch anything. When adversities come because of natural causes, that is one thing. However, it is different when evil is produced by an ambitious landlord. Sometimes I find neighbors, we cry and hug each other. Amidst all of this, I trust in God and in the justice system that this will be resolved as soon as possible. My grandchildren, who used to see me every Saturday and I cooked for them, are looking for familiar things as if they were at my home. I miss their hugs, their kisses, and that "I love you, Grandma" is gone. I miss them a lot because they are the breath of my life. I plead for justice in the middle of so much injustice. I'm asking for a freeze of the rent increase to protect my family and others like us.
Jimmy Silver. Jimmy Silver.
Thank you. I'm Jimmy Silver. I represent SPONY, the Small Property Owners of New York. And I'd like to share with you some data that was recently given to you. It's called the Income and Expense Study. And I know there's data in this report that is causing several of the public members to think that a correction is needed to the extent of a 0% increase. And they're looking at this data, and I hope you can revisit this with me, that in the last 4 years, the RPI expenses have not outpaced the PIOC increases, and this is causing you to think that a correction is needed. But I have to say that if you look at the history of the comparison of the RPI data with the PIOC data, you can't draw that conclusion, because if you look at the chart from 1990 to 2012, in fact, there were like 5 other years where the PIOC expenses the income and expenses far outpaced the PIOC expenses. For example, in 2003, the RPIE data showed 12.5% for owners' expenses compared to 9.4% for the PIOC. Again, in the year 2001, it showed 4.8% for the RPIE versus 1% for the PIOC. So what we're dealing with here is data that is pretty inaccurate, first of all, because you're dealing with a PIOC that's measured from March to March. You're dealing with an RPIE that's measured from January to December. The RGB staff concludes that these averages, to compare them, have to be weighted, and that in itself may cause a loss in accuracy. So you're dealing with inconclusive data, but you're using that data solely to support your conclusion that a correction is needed. And it's not a minor correction. You're talking about 0% increase. That is not fair, according to the data. You know, small property owners are on the fringe. They operate on a very tight budget. And their taxes for this year, the water and sewer and the real estate taxes, are going to go up 2.8%. And you're asking them to absorb that with a 0% rent increase and dig down into their pockets to pay the city. These are city taxes that have to be paid. They go into the city coffers. They fund social programs that the tenants, in turn, benefit from. This is a cycle. This is a cycle that everyone benefits from. And you know, if you have a zero...
Please let us ensure we can hear each of the people testifying.
If you vote for a 0% increase, and you make one of these small owners go over the edge where he can't afford his real estate taxes, and he can't pay it, do you think if he goes down to the Department of Finance and he says, listen, I've paid my real estate taxes for the last 30 years, but this year I'm getting a 0% rent increase, I can't pay it, that they're going to respond to him and say, okay, we understand, wait till next year when there's a rent increase, and then you can pay your real estate taxes. You have to be fair. You have to realize that small owners are an endangered species, and they're the backbone of housing in this city. They live in their apartments with their tenants.
So, Mr. Silver, we do very much appreciate the role of small owners, and we do appreciate the concerns that you're expressing. I think the reference to the 2001, 2002 years in which the income and expenses were different from the PIAC actually did result in a correction by the RGB board in subsequent years if you look back at explanatory statements. So I think the last couple of years in which the projected expenses of owners have vastly exceeded the actual expenses can be read in the same way that previous RGB boards have read them to necessitate a recognition that tenants have been paying more than they would have been paid had there been an ability to accurately project owner expenses. And so I think we are considering the data fairly. We are very concerned and cognizant about the importance of small owners, but we are considering the data. We are looking at it as systematically and carefully as we can, and I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Reuben Rojas. Reuben Rojas.
Good evening. My name is Reuben Rojas, Salvador. I have lived in my building for 10 years. My dad is a working class man and earns very little amount of money. Sometimes he doesn't buy food or clothes because of the rent. In my building, there's a lot of problems. Rats, kitchen cabinets are already old. The landlord never changes the kitchen cabinets. The painting in my bedrooms and bathrooms are missing. If they keep increasing the rent, I would be really angry because maybe I'm not going to college because my dad has to pay the rent and he doesn't have enough money to pay for my school. I could see that my dad is getting frustrated. He's stressed. He doesn't want to play with me. I just feel alone because he has to work very hard. What they don't see is that they're ruining our future, and that's how I feel because my dad is trying to save money for my school, but instead somebody screwed it up, and I'm not sure if I'm going to have a bright future. You guys are ruining my future, not just me, but probably all the children in New York City. Mayor de Blasio, it's your choice. Make a rent freeze or ruin our future.
Of babes.
Mis hijos y yo venimos luchando desde que él tenía 3 años de edad. Mi hijo tiene solo un riñón.
My son and I have been struggling since he was 3 years old. He has only 1 kidney.
Yo no he podido trabajar porque tengo que cuidarlo para que él sobreviva. Tiene una insuficiencia renal.
I can't work because I need to take care of him.
Quiero que sientan lo que es no tener para pagar tu renta.
I want you to know and feel what it is not to have money to pay the rent.
Para poder cuidar de tu hijo.
So that you can take care of your child.
Yo vivo con mi esposo, segundo esposo. El papá de mi hijo murió el 6 de diciembre. No pudo viajar porque pagábamos la renta o le pagaba un boleto de avión para poder despedir a su papá por última vez.
I'm sorry. She says my second husband passed away.
No, el papá de Ruben.
Ruben's father has passed away. And they weren't able to send him on an airplane because they needed to make sure that they had a roof over their heads and they paid their rent.
O pago mi renta. O pagaba para que Rubén viajara y se despidiera de su papá por última vez.
Or I paid my rent, or I had to pay for Ruben to take a plane flight to say goodbye to his father for the last time.
Thank you for your courage in sharing your story. And Mr. Rojas, you are an amazing speaker, and it's very impressive.
Thank you, ma'am.
Roger Melzer. Roger Melzer. Good afternoon, Mr. Melzer.
I'm going to refer to a few exhibits, so I don't know if it's distributed or not. My name is Roger Melzer. I own, manage, and maintain a 27-family apartment building in Brooklyn. When I purchased the property in 1985, it had an elderly absentee owner, a couple pages of violations, and no significant improvements have made since it was constructed in 1927. So I've worked very hard for 30 years, and I'm proud to say I ended the downhill spiral, eliminated all the violations, and created a safe, clean, and pleasant environment for all my tenants. I'm a member of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and I really believe in preserving the solid buildings that were designed and built several generations ago. But this proposed guideline to freeze stabilized rents this year is not fair and is contrary to any notion that the current administration wants to preserve affordable housing. And by preserving, I mean keeping buildings that are 90 to 125 years old, properly maintained now, and hopefully remaining serviceable for several more generations. This past winter, severe as it was, my heating expense alone was up 21%, which translates to a $25 per month increase for each apartment. And my real estate taxes are going up 4.5%, which is another $650. Then I've got some pointing and brickwork damage from the winter, and this will exceed $6,500, which is another $20 per apartment per month. So right there is over $50 per month in added expense per apartment this year. I'd also like to submit to the board a recent advertisement by a Park Slope-based tenant organization, the Fifth Avenue Committee, which is a display, an attachment here. For the apartments they're renovating, they call them affordable. But please note that the minimum rent is almost $1,000 per month and goes up to $1,700. And the required income levels run from $35,000 to $100,000. And these renovations come with all sorts of assistance and subsidies not available to the small building owner. So this rent guidelines board has to be realistic and fair. There are a huge number of stabilized apartments that fall well below the rent threshold of what even HPD-sponsored developers can afford. I therefore recommend for a one-year lease, renewals, a rent increase of $50 or 6% per month, whichever is higher, and for two-year renewals, an increase of $75 or 9.5%, whichever is higher. This concludes my presentation. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. I also had an attachment I don't have time for, which shows the disparity since 2001 and how rent-controlled apartments have gone up by 5.5%, and that's based on a strict rental formula, and the rent-stabilized rents have only gone up 3.8%, so they've fallen far behind what the state has determined are the operating levels necessary to run apartments. And I've researched this, I've kept track of it all these years.
Thank you for your submission. Jennifer Atkin. Jennifer Atkin. Or Action, sorry.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Jenny Action, and I live in a 3-story, 6-unit walk-up on Flushing in Northeast Bed-Stuy. My roommates and I reside in 2 apartments on the first floor of our building. We rent each of them for $2,000, so well below the stabilization rate. The relatively low cost of our living space allows my roommates and I to pursue a range of different types of careers, most of which involve community activism. We do youth work, mental health work. We are artists, students, writers, and teachers. And these jobs we find fulfilling to ourselves and as a service to our community, but require that we live in low-cost spaces in order to continue to work in New York. Our building is managed by a company called Neighborhood Management Services. Since I've lived there, they have not been able to make any repairs, including fixing a dangerous leak, which led to the growth of black mold in at least 2 of our residential spaces. Far worse, they neglected to repair the broken heat in our apartment for the entire winter. In spite of repeated calls to our landlord's offices, my roommates and I spent the coldest months of the year sleeping in sleeping bags and around space heaters. One of my roommates reported that he would wake up every morning to find the water glass by his bed completely frozen. These are not conditions for any human being to live in, but our landlord didn't seem to care. He failed to return our calls, and he failed to make the repairs needed to restore our apartment to habitability. As frustrating and as personally trying as it was to return to that freezing apartment night after night, What was even more difficult to grapple with was the knowledge that all around New York, hundreds if not thousands of other tenants were struggling with the same neglect. That landlords regularly continue to collect rent under these conditions, and furthermore can collect increases in rent from year to year without making these necessary repairs, makes all of our city officials complicit in the plight of these residents. But that's not where my story ends. In early April, just as the weather began to warm, the Department of Buildings informed me and my roommates that we needed to vacate our space immediately due to uninhabitable living conditions. Our landlord's disinterest in maintaining the building, ensuring that it was fire safe, and keeping it up to city code essentially resulted in all of my roommates becoming homeless overnight. My roommates are now in court to fight our eviction, but we're an exception in this regard. So many families facing eviction will not have the chance to defend their homes and will not have the chance to speak to you today about these dangerous conditions, conditions that are an inevitable byproduct of a broken housing system. It is unconscionable that landlords like ours should be allowed to earn a rent increase on buildings which they intentionally neglect and in some cases even actively destroy. Why should the burden be placed on tenants to pay landlords and management companies who consistently provide bad service and pass the buck on violations, complaints, and back taxes? We are rewarding this bad behavior, allowing landlords to collect an automatic increase year after year. I'm going to wrap up, I'm sorry. Landlords citywide are failing their tenants as a matter of practice, and it's up to you, the Rent Guidelines Board, and our city housing officials to ensure that they are held accountable for holding up their end of the bargain. I urge you to approve a 0% increase because safe, well-maintained, and affordable homes are not too much to ask for. Thank you.
Constance Nugent Miller, and then Mary Brutch, and then Dorothy Sarantopoulos. So Constance Nugent Miller.
Hi, good evening, Rent Board. I see you have some new members. I'm the poorest landlord, as always. 6-family apartment building in Brooklyn, New York, about 27 years of ownership. We're all in the same boat. This is a broken system, okay? I feel it for my tenants. I feel it for the seniors and the disabled community who have to live under these political guidelines, because this is politics at play here. They continue to put us against each other. Okay? They continue to run that scam on us. Tenants against landlords. Like one of my tenants said, Miss Miller, we like you living here because everything that goes wrong, you feel it too. I'm invested. I'm not upstate. I'm not in Florida. I'm in the trenches with my tenants. And I feel really bad for my younger tenants coming in from college with $800 student loans and they have to pay high rent. How do I maintain? I feel horrible for them because I knew it took me until I was 38 years old to pay off my student loan. Okay? It's a system. It's an institution, what they're doing here. 0 increase, realistically? I mean, come on. The housing stock is falling apart. Okay? It's on its knees. Do you think 0 is going to make it better? Do you think it's going to provide better housing for the tenants? It's not. Stop the farce. I am asking you to consider, especially the small owners, the immigrants that came into this country when this was not the thing to do. Nobody wanted to be a landlord or a developer. It was, you know, it just got hip the other day, okay? But I would like you to consider the small landlord and do a little better than what you're doing right now with these guidelines. We need the help because we're in the same leaky boat, okay? We're in the same boat. A .45 is like $5 on my 900 rent. You know, what can I do with that? I have a child in school too. Okay? I have a child in school. I can't send her away. I send her to a community college because that's all I can afford. Okay? We're not different. We're very, very much alike.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
So Councilman Jumaane Williams, I understand, is here? Welcome, Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the entire committee. I actually want to piggyback on some of what the previous speaker just said. I do believe that this system is 100% flawed. I do believe that it unnecessarily pits us against each other when we don't have to. I really wish that we had the authority to decide some of these increases depending on how people have taken care of their apartments, on their buildings, the size and the amount of units that they have would be fantastic. But we don't have that ability to do that. And for decades, we have sided on the side of landlords. And that's just the honest truth. And I'm here testifying as a rent-stabilized tenant, also as an owner who has tenants who owe him money. I am also testifying as the chair of Housing and Buildings in the City Council. And I am saying this because what I hope, based on what I'm saying, is that some of the owners, even a lot of the small owners in particular, will join me in fighting to repeal the Erstat law in the state so that we can have more control here, so that when we come here we can separate and make sure that the people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing are not lumped in with the people who are the bad actors. But for many decades, when we asked this question, we sided on the side of owners, and that is just the truth. There has never been a time where we came in and said, let's give a rollback to tenants. Let's give a zero increase to tenants. For many years, this board has been a sham. And then this year came. And I was excited to see that we asked the question, do we even need an increase to begin with? We answered that question by saying, no, we can give zero increases in 0.5. And I want to say that I'm honored that this board, for once, we'll ask the first question before we get to the automatic yes, because that's what's happened, and tenants have gotten railroaded in this city when it came to increasing rents. So what I would like to do is, one, we need to repeal Erstat so that we can separate it. But until we do that, we have to make up for a lot of lost time when it comes to tenants. Landlords have gotten income increases that were more than their expenses, and that's based on the information that we have. So I should be here asking for a rent rollback to catch up for all of the money that has been made. But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to ask for is what the mayor, who I supported, asked for when he was running, and that is a rent freeze for the tenants of the city of New York, so that as a city we can say, we hear you, we hear your plight, and we understand that we will be fighting for the repeal of Erstat so we can make sure that people who need and deserve an increase get it, and the bad actors and the people who don't. But until then, rent freeze, rent freeze, rent freeze, rent freeze, rent freeze. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Ujiz? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Matthew Eugene, and I'm the New York City Council member representing District 40. I want to join all of you here to ask for a very simple thing: freeze the rent. As a city council member serving the district, the 40th district, a district which is home for so many hardworking people, I cannot tell you how many times people go to my office because they cannot pay their rent, because they are facing eviction. There's a big crisis in New York City: housing. It is a big crisis in New York City. And housing is a basic human need. People should have a place, a safety place where they can live and raise their children. The rent is too high. We have to freeze the rent. Let me tell you, the people who come to my office, they are hardworking people. They have been paying taxes, contributing to the society. The assistance, public housing assistance is decreasing. The rent is increasing, but the salaries of the people are not increasing. This is a good recipe for homeless, to increase the number of homeless in New York City. And who are going to become homeless? People who have been working very hard. Hard-working people. Let me tell you, when the rent is too high and the people cannot pay the rent, they are forced to move. And that affects the children also. The children, we all believe that they are the future of this nation. That impact on the academic result. If the children, the parents don't have a place to live because they cannot pay, the children won't have a place to go safely after school to get ready for the school for tomorrow. And let me tell you also, when people cannot pay the rent, that increases stress also. That impact on their health. And not only impact on those people, but impact in the community. And I believe that we as a city, as a society, we have the moral obligation to come together to resolve and correct this crisis. And the way to do it is to create safe, secure, affordable housing and freeze the rent. Freeze the rent.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.